After fixing his stuff and making sure everything was ready, Yuan went to the airport to go see a 2D theme park. When he's about to board his plane, he's transported to another world. A flightless wyvern transport almost hit Yuan and threw him off the ground. Spider-Woman, Shinra Kusakabe, Tinkerbell, and Hermione are all flying above him. After daydreaming of unimaginable riches and a harem, he's met by an old guy who asks him if he already took the entrance test from the border country. Of course, our Yuan doesn't know, so the old guy dragged him to the testing grounds. On the testing grounds, he was told by the judges that he's supposed to touch the stone to see what kind of spirit magic he has. As explained by the judges, their continent of Daoya has a near infinite amount of magic types. Our hero here doesn't even have any, getting himself disqualified in the process. He walks out of the grounds and meets the same old man who dragged him there in the first place. He told our hopeless Yuan that he can become the greatest gardener there is. His talent, growing plants. Anyway, while growing plants, he saw a couple of guys fawning over a woman who noticed him peeking and ordered the boys to chase him down. When they find out he's just a pathetic piece of trash, they leave him alone, agonizing over his helplessness. He ponders, but the old guy comes in and tells him about fairies, which are entities that far outclass any type of magic in the world. The old guy gave him a seed, which, after traveling the entire world, he still doesn't know how to grow this seed. Luckily for Yuan, he can read and write Chinese, which is etched on the seed. He tried to grow it multiple times, with various techniques, but failed tremendously. So the last thing he did was cut his hand and dropped blood onto it. Still, nothing happened. That night, he went to the same forest and saw the same guys flirting with the same woman who ordered to chase him down. That woman turned out to be a vampire and killed the two guys. Unfortunately for Yuan, the vampire knows he's there, and so he was killed as well. Before he dies, Chinese 02 comes in, introduces herself as the blood demon from hell, and tells him she's about to take his life as well. Jesus, my man can't take a break. The bloody fairy can't kill him, so she killed the vampire instead, transferring the vampire's power to revive him. Our guy wakes up, sees the fairy that saves him and asks her if she's the one he's calling. But Blood Fairy here won't take jokes and explain that she only saved him cause she wants to kill him herself. She lunged at him but was wounded in the process. She repeatedly attacks our Yuan, but she's the only one taking damage. A woman appears and tells them the legend is true, introducing herself as the chairwoman of the Shuo Yue Academy and explaining their relationship. The chairwoman gave Yuan a fairy guide and told him to raise his hand. Possessed, Yuan commanded the fairy to go back to her seed form. At her house, the chairwoman explained to Yuan about fairies in the Leprechaun guidebook, telling him that the only way that she'll give him her fairy seeds is if he becomes her student and finds the vampires in the academy. Back in his house, he reads the book and the fairy guide appears, explaining more about fairies. And so the day comes and he finally went to the academy to learn more about fairies but was stopped by a delinquent student, telling him to pick up his magic crystal. When he did, it exploded with radiant light and everyone was in awe. Yuan, possessed, scans everyone and immediately asks a girl out. Later, he learned more about his powers and went on to finally train in the academy. The delinquent challenged him to a duel. Yuan didn't really want a battle, but a carriage of a royalty appears and demands the duel to start. The battle was really one-sided as Yuan won again by default. He collapses and wakes up in an unfamiliar place. Seeing a familiar face, Yuan wakes up in what seems like yet another world and takes care of the child he saw there. However, some goons appear out of nowhere and beat him up. He actually wakes up in the real world and the fairy guide tells him that it's a fairy world he was in earlier, and it's a strategy of the fairies, who were once humans. Yuan checked in on Mo Fei and tried to clear a misunderstanding, but was interrupted when two girls showed up in the room he was in, bringing in evidence. A knight appears, telling them about their plans tonight, which the Yuan overheard. Later that night, a sus person appeared in front of his house but mistaken to be an intruder, so he sucker punched this person, knocking her out. Turns out, it was the princess earlier that morning and was beaten to a pulp after the princess woke up finding herself in the same bed as this guy. He bribed her with instant noodles. However, the princess noticed there's someone outside, which turned out to be the two women who entered the infirmary later that afternoon. They're looking for the princess. They tried to hide, but when they were about to be found, Ding Yuan bound the two in his vines and escaped together with the princess, telling her to find a hiding spot. He confronted the vampires and summoned Mo Fei, who completely overpowered the two. But the knight appeared and battled Mo Fei, but not before killing the two vampires, calling him king. The battle was dragging on, but Mo Fei was clearly on the offside. Yuan called in for help, and the fairy guide told her that the only way Mo Fei can win is through daily interactions and strengthening her fairy world. The first option is not possible now, so they went for the second option. Luckily, the princess appeared and offered her help, as she is a spiritual master, transported into another world. Yuan saw Mo Fei's past as a hitman. He tried to interact, but she couldn't see him. The fairy guide told him that it was because he was already in this timeline. Mo Fei meets what seems to be Yuan's incarnation in that timeline, and had multiple interactions over the course of a short time. Mo Fei meets the same guy again, this time saving him from the bad guys beating him up. Remembering the time she was saved as well, the guy gave him the sword as a present, which he previously declined to sell. Mo Fei responded that he should call her if he ever needs help. Back in the real world, the knight launches a technique to kill our boy, but Mo Fei saves her, binding the knight in her blood vines. Back again in the fairy world, Yuan is trying to figure out a way for Mo Fei to see him, but the other guy can see him. Yuan confronts him, but the guy just checkmate him, asking him if he'll just do the same thing to Mo Fei, and leaves. Let's just call this guy Chad. Chad visits Mo Fei's house and Mo Fei disables him, telling him it's rare for her to get any visitors. Chad brought some sweets and leaves. The next day, the two are at the top of the tower, watching the sunset and Chad telling more about himself and his adventures. He asked Mo Fei to come with him. Mo Fei goes on a killing spree again but hides her sword after seeing Chad with flowers. When she arrives at her home, Chad cooked for her and she confessed that she's a killer. Chad said he hates killing, but not her. On her next job, her boss warns her to be wary of Chad, but she just ignores it and proceeds to do it. Mo Fei asked Chad to meet him at the beach, and Chad promised to meet her at the tower. The day has arrived, but Chad is nowhere to be seen. After waiting for 3 days straight, her boss went to the tower warning her, but was interrupted when they were suddenly attacked. She retaliated and went on only to find out that she was betrayed, stabbed by the girl he saved from the attackers. The mastermind, Chad himself. Chad lied and betrayed Mo Fei. Chad and his fairies started massacring the bandits who double-crossed him, while Mo Fei, after going through the 5 stages of grief in 10 seconds, attacked him, failing in the process. Since Chad was being protected by fairies, seeing her suffering, Chad offered Mo Fei to be a fairy to survive and avenge her death on her own. Yuan attacked the guy, but he can't hit and damage him since he's not in their world. Chad explains he's just trying to evolve NPCs and that they're the same, and then leaves. Yuan tries to save Mo Fei, risking his own life to do so. 02 comes down and finally understood why he's so stupid. Our guy wakes up, clears the misunderstanding, and leaves the fairy world. Yuan comes back to the real world and transforms into a Gigachad fairy, pops the knight in the gut, sending the knight into an explosive defeat. Anyway, Yuan wakes up and the chairwoman comes in to give him his 2 seeds as promised. The next day, 2 transfer students were introduced to Yuan's class, namely, Princess and Kai and Mo Fei. Yuan went to the library to ask for plant acceleration magic and met the librarian, giving him the scrolls he needs. Unfortunately, he can't use the scrolls, so the fairy guide just ate the plant detection encyclopedia to help Yuan to grow the seeds. After a week, his wait is over as 2 fairies sprung out of the seeds and Yuan managed to send the 2 into his phone. Meanwhile, the defeated knight reported back to his king, telling him of his defeat. Mad, the king ordered him to kill the master of the fairies, to help him accelerate the growth of their empire. Chairwoman informs Yuan that the knight he fought wasn't just targeting the princess, but him as well. Yuan said he's gonna get stronger, and so the chairwoman told him to get out of the college immediately, and in return, she'll teach him how to be stronger. But before he leaves, the librarian asked him to do some fetching quests of gathering scrolls, giving him a crystal terminal to redeem rewards. And so the group leaves for an adventure. Arriving at a lake, they meet a dragon named Georgios, who's mistaken Yuan for someone else. Yuan asked to duel the dragon and forced it into submission. The dragon fled the scene and left him a flute to summon him to Yuan's side. After some island hopping, the party rests inside a lake resort. Here, they learned about the legend of Woody Lake and Lotus Frost's past. Later that night, a group of hunters appear. Seeing this, Yuan summoned the dragon Long Wai, but he betrayed and attacked our Yuan, making him fall into the lake. Mo Fei went after him but found nothing, so she went back to the fairies. Then the knight appears inside the princess quarters, smiting her down, but she's shielded by a protection charm laid out by Yuan. The princess woke up, hugged the knight, and told him about her adventures. Hearing a loud sound, she dragged the knight to check out the ongoing battle while she was asleep. As he's falling down the lake, Yuan wakes up in yet another fairy world, meeting Lotus Frost, Chad, and the young version of the dragon. Chad told him that another game has started and asked Long Wai to investigate more about the Lotus Girl. Lotus was actually trying to heal her sister, so Chad went on to meet Lotus Girl and helped her recover the medicine. They arrived at the cave and found the herb, but were attacked by a giant cat monster. Chad saves Lotus Girl, but she goes up to pick up the herb Yuan charged to save her from the falling rocks, but Chad swoops in to save her. The two ditched our guy, but found a dead end instead. As Chad was about to attack the monster, Lotus Girl picked up a stick and tried attacking the enraged monster, only to be saved again by Chad. Chad stopped the monster's stomp and knocked it down. Chad meets Lotus Girl once again and she tells him that her sister can't recover no matter how many herbs she gives. Chad told her about a cure and Lotus Girl told him she'll do anything. The next day, Chad follows Lotus Girl's sister and confesses, asking her to be his own. Keep in mind that it's the sick girl he's hitting on. Still missing the ingredient, Lotus Girl's sister went back to the forest and met Chad, who offered to take her somewhere nice. After reaching the heart of the lake, LG's sister started coughing blood and passed out. LG went with them to the lake, riding another boat, and told him to help her sister be cured. LG's sister meets Chad again and he reveals the cure to her, but tells her it's too expensive for what it's worth and very dangerous. Chad meets Lotus Girl again and tells him to pretend with her. LG's sister cried after hearing her sister's pain. Things got really fast and her older sister is now on the brink of death, as Lotus is delivering her to the lake as the final ingredient for her cure. Lotus decided that life isn't worth it anymore, so she brought her sister to the lake and prayed that they'll be together even in death. Chad heard her prayer and turned them into fairies, so they could live together forever. Yuan was really offended by Chad toying with human lives and attacked him for doing so. Chad told him that there's nothing he can do and basically, the endings are already set. However, our Yuan responded by telling him he will save them and shouted really loud. Yuan is back again in the lake and now it's his turn to change the fate of the twins. Basically, he did what Chad did previously, but with a different take each time. However, when he was invited over for dinner, the sick sister poisoned the two, leaving them unconscious, telling him it's actually her older sister who is sick. Yuan wakes up to find that the twins aren't in the house. He heads out to find the two, only to see them at the lakeside. Chad appears to tell him that this is the ending he wanted, but Yuan refuses to accept this ending and asks for another chance. Back to square one, he did the same thing again, but this time he barged in at the right time to stop the sick sister from killing the older sister, telling her that it's her older sister's plan to make her hate her, to cure her disease. The twins reconcile and Chad congratulates Yuan. At first, he thought his efforts were for nothing. The sick girl turned fairy, told him that it's not and he can still change a future out there, sending him back to the real world. Yuan rises out of the water, on top of a dragon and attacks the knight's group. Our Yuan was hugged by Lotus Frost and transformed into yet another Giga Chad fairy. Yuan is on Ultra Instinct mode here and pretty much toppled the entire group in a one-sided match, turning them into human ice cubes. Alas, the knight has a trick under his greaves, but even that won't stop our Yuan, as he also has a trump card. He fused with Mo Fei, while on a fuse with Lotus Frost, further increasing his power and making him look like Radagon from the Elden Ring. The knight didn't even get to throw his power move. Holy crap. Yuan unleashed his noble phantasm, but was deflected by the knight's shadow clone jutsu. So, he charged his energy ball, but was stopped by the princess, trying to protect his knight. The knight, feeling guilty, leaves the princess crying, in Yuan's care. After the fight, Lotus Frost leaves the party to accompany her sister's soul, and to protect her no matter what. Lotus Frost transforms into a really large flower, together with her sister. Mo Fei asked our guy to help her rebuild her inner world, so she can rest in peace as well. And so the story ends here as the princess and Yuan ride into the unknown on top of their newfound transport. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.